Level Up is a regular podcast that brings you topics to help you perform at work and in life at your very highest level. Your host is Dan Chiodo, an executive coach, corporate trainer, and author. He is president of Impact Training and Executive Coaching. And now, here's Dan.
Thanks for teeing things up for us, Jesse. Our viewers are here to see Level Up, the place to go when you want to grow. So let's set the stage for what we're going to do today. Our guest has been here before, and he has brought us some wonderful topics, especially for our young professionals, and he's going to do that again today. In fact, we're going to go deep into that topic. He was the CEO of a major health system in the Midwest, and after he retired, he really didn't retire because he's been doing so many things, including on the board of the Midwest Transplant Network, which serves all of Western Missouri and Kansas. And he also works with young people, so thank goodness for that. It's wonderful to talk to young professionals, but it's great to have some experience for them so that they can learn things. And he's just the person to do that. And I will say this, that our guest, the last time he was on Level Up, I had someone come up to me and say, it was perfect because I was asked to be on a board and I didn't know what questions to ask. And he had said everything that you should do, and it was just perfect for me. So I hate to put pressure on our guest today to top that, what he did for at least one of our viewers, but we're happy to welcome Gary Duncan. Thank you for being here again, Gary.
Well, it's certainly my pleasure, Dan. It's good to be back with you.
Yeah, I love it when we talk about young professionals. I love it when we talk about things like mentoring, because that's what sometimes we can offer people. So I'd like you to talk about the group you have, the young professionals that you work with, but also that topic in general so that we can learn more about this mentoring process.
Well, it's an interesting process in group mentoring. My group, for example, is very diverse. I have a EDD, or Doctor of Education. I have a CPA. I have a safety director for a manufacturing company. I have a young lady that's in the Army and bucking up to be a sergeant. And so it's a very diverse group. I have a banker. And because of the process of group mentoring, I think it's important to understand that no matter what you do in terms of a career, whether it's leadership, management, professional, what it might be, you're always going to find yourself in a group dynamic. Whether you're in a group with senior leaders, with managers, with employees, with the community, on a board of directors, you name it, generally there's a group dynamic. And so I would say for young professionals, one of the reasons to be in a group mentor situation is just to learn the group dynamic. It's not that they don't know it, but it gives you a chance in a diverse group to really see by example, for example, the mentor, but also the group process, so they feel more comfortable with it. So that as you progress through your career, it's not a stumbling block to have a strange group of people you got to deal with. So I think that's a very important piece of group mentoring.
I find that really interesting when they all come together and they can learn from each other. You know, as a coach, I work with people one-on-one, and we can certainly accomplish a lot that way. But there's something really special when they all can share their stories and talk about what's going on in their lives as well as their careers.
I think for our listeners, it's important what you just said, because when you're dealing and coaching one-on-one, you can really target things that you want to go after in terms of your own behavior, your knowledge. In a group, yes, you can do part of that, but the dynamic is you learn a lot of things that other people want to learn. And so in some ways, some things may not be totally critical to your understanding, but it enhances and expands your understanding, I think.
That's good. How do you make it so that what they say, because they're coming from all walks of life, coming from different institutions, how do you keep the confidentiality in check?
But that's a key plank, if you will, of a successful mentoring group. when I bring a new person into the group, I remind them privately, but I also remind them in the group, which is a reminder for the group, that the key to our group is trust. And the only way we build trust is that it's confidential. And I take it to this extreme, mostly for demonstration. And that is, I don't have two members in the group from the same segment of the economy. So for example, you don't want two bankers from competing institutions or two CPAs, because once you do that, you either draw down the conversation to the less intense or the less helpful, or somebody's feelings get hurt because they share something about their bank and somehow it gets back to the other bank. And of course, that loop being closed can be a real problem for the group member. So I encourage that we do that. The other thing that I do, and I think is important when you're in a group, is before we accept a new member, because Young Professional Network wants to send us a person who wants to get in the group, which I understand, but the rule is the group has to vet them first. And really what I'm looking for, I can do most of it, but what I'm looking for is this new person, is there some relationship with a member of that group that we don't know about? It could be marital, it could be trouble on the job, it could be in a job together at one point and they didn't get along. So I let the group decide if the new person's coming in or not. And that way, I think we can pretty well avoid that and really build on confidentiality.
I like that. And the thing that's great is that is kind of like a team comes together at a place of employment. If you have the team be part of that interviewing process to make sure that this person is a good one to be part of the family, right?
Absolutely. It's sort of a demonstration project for that. And it's a good comment, Dan.
You know, sometimes I will tell teams that I'm talking to that it's good for them to talk about situations they face. And sometimes they can talk about it at work, and sometimes they may want to consult someone else. So a group like you have, that would be a perfect place to do that, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it is. And once the group's comfortable with each other, they can even try out some behaviors with each other based on their job or based on the issue they want to deal with. And once that trust is there, it's more helpful in some ways for the group to give them feedback than me to give them feedback. So that's a good dynamic.
That's great. Well, tell me a little bit about the engagement. How do you get them to be a part of what's going on?
Well, just as when you're in your career, you're going to be involved in the group process. Also in your career, it's critical that you're able to engage others. And for those, our listeners who listened to Level Up episode 14, we talked about what successful CEOs do. In other words, it was a Harvard Business Review where over 10 years, 3,000 senior leaders, over half of them were CEOs, and they were looking to see on an interview what traits translate to success on the job and what don't. And one of the top 5 traits that leads to success on the job is engagement. So that for a leader, a manager, a young professional, if we can engage different stakeholders, whether it's in our department, whether it's senior leadership, whatever it might be, once we have the skills to do that, then we can begin to move on in our career. And I think the important thing in a group setting is that we don't lecture on that so much as we just do it. So I think it's the mentor's task to begin to show people engagement just by doing it and pulling them in and helping them engage each other. I think it's a trait we don't always think of as a real important trait, but I think in life, being able to engage others is critical.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that in terms of engagement. Sometimes the person facilitating it does it, but it sounded like you were saying that maybe they engage each other. Do they kind of challenge each other?
Absolutely. And I think that as you know, that's the mentor's task, is not to lecture, but to demonstrate and then have the group do it, because all of a sudden it just becomes a part of behavior instead of, we talked about engagement. How does that work? And it's much easier if you're doing it every group meeting.
Yes. You know, sometimes you lead from behind, don't you? And this process looks like one where you would do that. You just see where this goes. It sounds like they they take it in some good places.
Absolutely. It goes places you would never dream of as the mentor. And it introduces things that you haven't thought of, just as sometimes we introduce things that the group hasn't thought of.
That's right. Talk a little bit about inclusion, if you would.
So I think with inclusion, you want to also in the group. Oftentimes you'll be in a situation in the group where somebody that's normally very involved and active in the group discussion all of a sudden isn't with you. They're there, but they're not with you. And I think that happens a lot when you're in a group and a career. And one of the learnings is, how do I bring that person back into the group without embarrassing them? How do I get them back into the discussion, pull them back from whatever reverie they're stuck in about their personal life or whatever, and bring them back so they feel included and feel supported? And I think you can only do that by demonstration.
Have you ever had a situation where, let's say, someone was not participating very much and there was something on their mind and something happening in their life? Have you ever had a situation where the group kind of goes down that road for a little bit to help them out?
I may be different than a lot of mentors, but we're not a personal growth group, and I'm certainly not a personal growth counselor. And so when I see that beginning to happen, I try to say, okay, how does that affect the job? Because I was in a group, interesting you should bring that up, because one of the other mentors here asked me to come over and lead his group. He just wanted to see how I did it. I said, hey, that sounds like fun. Mm-hmm. And so we did. And I ran into this. A young man in that group started taking us down a path of, he and his wife kind of had a bad encounter the night before, and he's still trying to think how they're going to work that out, et cetera. And I thought, this group cannot get pulled into that. Because now all of a sudden we've changed the dynamic of a group to the real potential to start hurting feelings, because none of us are counselors. And so I steered that back out, and we talked how he was doing today on the job, and was it not affecting him on the job, and what was he going to do today to make the job, blah, 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 blah. So I worry about that, because I don't think in the group we want to deal with too many relationships outside of work.
Right. And I think mentors and coaches too, we're not trained in that field, so we shouldn't really go there. Right. The interesting thing, though, is that sometimes people don't realize that what's happening at home can affect their work. And I hope that they learn when they're together with a group like that it's all about performance. It's all about achievement. And when you're at work, you are on stage, and I hope that they just relish that and figure out what's going on in their life so that they lose any of the potential they have for peak performance.
Right. One of the interesting things, the former president of the electric utility in Joplin and I, we do a 1-hour chat for Leadership Joplin about what we learned being CEOs, which usually is quite funny, actually. But one of the things that he always says, that when I took over the job, as CEO, it took me a while to realize that all of those people working for us, everything I read about and heard about on the news, they were being affected by it in some way. And so to understand that, yes, we want productivity on the job, we want them in the job, sometimes we have to step back and say, okay, what's the big picture here? And I find that on occasion in the group, I'll have someone stay afterwards and say, do you have a minute? Or can we get together for lunch? Then I feel more comfortable in that situation. I just don't feel comfortable in it in the group setting.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I guess that's the difference, that certain things you would discuss in a group setting, and then there are those things that would be best to talk to a coach or a friend about, because you're not going to be as open about that situation. So it sounds like you really personalize your group. It sounds very unique.
Well, one of the things that I do, I prepare something every week or every other week, just in case the conversation drops or whatever, which almost never happens. But I try to prepare a topic, and I'll pick it up from LinkedIn or, just something simple, not a heavy read. But then I'll go through it and try to do some jots out to the side to say, when did I have this experience in my career, either directly or vicariously. And I find that being able to give examples of that really makes the impression and the point sticks much better than trying to remember what the point was. And I've been at this 7.5 years, and so I've got some people that have moved on, either going back to graduate school, promoted out of town, and I try to stay in touch with all those people a couple times a year just to see what's going on and how they're doing. And I've had them on more than one occasion refer back to say, that time you talked about when you had a group of physicians just up and left the group, and what you did to try to make up for that. I've used that a couple of times in my work when I got big surprises. And that just underscores the importance of that giving actual real life experience. It sticks.
That is really important. In fact, I'd like to focus on that a little bit on our second half, if we could, because I think those stories are very rich. If you're just joining us, we are here with Gary Duncan, talking about young professionals on Level Up. We'll be back after a short break. This is Dan Chiodo, and you are watching Level Up.
At Express Employment Professionals
in Gulfport, Mississippi,
in Springfield, Illinois,
in Bend, Oregon,
in Champaign, Illinois,
in Corpus Christi, Texas,
in Jersey City, in Fishers, Indiana,
here in Knoxville, Tennessee.
We're on a mission.
We're on a mission.
We're on a mission.
We're on a mission.
A mission.
A mission.
A mission.
A mission.
Mission.
We're on a mission to put 1 million people to work.
If you just tuned in, you are watching Level Up, the place to go when you want to grow. We're really growing today as we start with young professionals and talk about all the things that are so essential in helping to mentor them. Gary Duncan is our guest, and he has been addressing that. Right before we left for commercial, we talked about stories, and I want to spend some time on storytelling. And this is the story hour now. So Gary, talk a little bit about what stories mean in the mentoring process.
Well, I think one of the things that I try to do is occasionally insert a story from my experience, either directly or vicariously or maybe indirectly. And our listeners, again, might remember when we, in episode 23, when we were talking about, so you've been asked to be on a board. One of the things in that, when I talk about that with the group, I give examples of boards I've been on and both examples of what to do and what not to do. And for example, one board I was on, a new person came in, very bright young lady, very bright. But she proceeded to tell us everything she knew about what she knew about our area and pretty much dominated the whole board meeting. And of course, I'm sure someone talked to her later because her behavior improved greatly. But it's just that point to say, when you go into something new, make sure you don't tell everybody everything you know right away. Things like that. And then stories out of the healthcare system. So for example, when we're talking about innovation and how do you pull innovation out of your coworkers or your subordinates, and I give the example that we started on a program called Bright Ideas, where a person could put in any idea they had to save costs or enhance revenue. And out of that program, we budgeted about $1 million of cost savings, expense reduction, and revenue enhancement. And I talk about the different ways people have done that. And I can see that aha moment in people's eyes about, I could do that. So that's kind of what I like about storytelling.
I like that. One time I sat down and started to list the stories that I could tell in my profession that were helpful to me. And I was amazed by the number of stories that you could put down. And sometimes it's so much more meaningful than just talking about a theory or anything else.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the things that I wanted to throw in, Gary, is that the visual part of all this. So I think the stories are so enriching. And then as we look at what visually can be done. So as an executive coach, I use that quite a bit. Now, in some of my offices, which could be a bar in any city that I'm in, you can actually use a napkin, a cocktail napkin. and you can start drawing. You can be talking to people. And there's something about the visual part of maybe putting a circle, and in that circle is an issue they're dealing with. And now you start to draw out lines with smaller circles about solutions to a situation they're dealing with. And I think that there is some research that shows you remember more if you attach the visual part and the story part. So we remember the stories. And then if we can even learn to draw a stick person or something to just show them, okay, this is you, what's going on in your head, what's happening right now. And to demonstrate some of that, they remember it. The other part too is a lot of times through school, we were criticized if we were doodlers, if we were not taking notes in the typical way, and we're just doodling and drawing boxes and everything else. Again, research shows that for some people, they are still absorbing the information. It's just that they have to have something visual going on. So right. Important component for me.
Absolutely, yes. It's kind of like remembering those great lines from famous movies, you know? You put the story together with the visual and it sticks.
That's right. That's right. I think, what's the one, Caddyshack or one of those movies where they talk about someone saying squirrel? And I use that all the time, and people know right away what that's all about.
Yep, it connects.
Yeah. That's great. Well, tell us some more. What else should we talk about in terms of the mentoring process and your group?
If I talk about, let's say from the group members standpoint, I think one of the important points to know about a group is the mentor lifting key points out of a discussion. By way of example, a person brings up that they're having a problem with an employee that reports to them, and they seem to be just contrary to what they were. They were always pretty effective, but all of a sudden things aren't getting done. They're a bit argumentative, and things just aren't going right. Well, I think the mentor has to be careful not to go down that road too far, because now we're going to talk about discipline and all of those things which are probably extraneous to some point. And for the mentor to say, okay, let's think about what changed this person. Can we have them say, why do you feel this way about your work? So that we lift those different points out. What have other people observed? Are there some contention between them and another person in the office, so that we, round out our discussion? I think it's very important that no matter what the topic is, the mentor, for some point, stays back about 20,000 feet and says, what are the key issues we can draw, key learnings we can draw out of this, rather than just the storyline?
Yes, yes. And that learning process is so important, and it's just nice to hear you talk about what you do, because it's like beyond a university. And it's pulling together the knowledge perhaps we learned there at whatever school we were at, and what we're learning in business, and how to pull this all together. So a mentoring group can really do that.
Yeah, it certainly can. And I've been one that I haven't used books a lot, because the people in the group are busy. They have family, they have other demands on them. So I don't try to get them to do a lot of reading. It's just more spot things. But I think that a lot of times when they've read an article, say it's from LinkedIn or Forbes or Harvard, whatever that we've talked about, is that I don't try to talk about the whole article, but let's go in and lift the key points, learning points for us in this, so that we're not stuck in going through the whole thing, but we lift out what, at least in my estimation, are important.
Right, right. You're to be applauded for what you're doing here, because where I am in Florida, Naples, Florida, I will be at coffee shops. And if I'm not working and I'm just having coffee, I will see people who are retirees who are gathering for coffee. And some of them will say that they moved here thinking they were going to play golf every day. And then they decide that that's not as much fun as they thought. And so they then perhaps look for businesses or other things. But it would be so good if they would give back what you're giving to help the next generation. to help them do well. So what you're doing is so applaudable. The other thing is that I know some of the people are in your group and they're very pleased with it and they find it very nurturing. And studies show that people do better at their work when they are happier. And as you talk about some of the situations, if you have a group there with you who can help you figure it out, how can you not be happy that you found a solution to that and happier about what you do? Yeah. So I think you help them with that, I'm sure.
Well, I thank you. Those are kind words, and I appreciate it. But the truth is also, it keeps me learning new things because they're generations away from me. And I find that over the past 7.5 years, I've learned a whole bunch of stuff that if I turned in an old geezer, I wouldn't have learned. So it keeps me involved, and I get as much out of it as they do, truth be told.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, hey, any parting thoughts that you want to talk about before we wrap up this episode?
The only other topic I bring up, and just very briefly, is that one of the temptations in groups, I think, are to start talking about political topics and that sort of thing. I think a lot of times, if you want to see that trust factor begin to kind of erode a little bit, is get people in popular topics on politics, etc. On the other hand, I think something that we can do, by way of example, Joplin, about a year ago, the council put a use tax. We're going to put a use tax on the ballot. Everybody had an opinion about it. And it came up one day in the group, and I thought, okay, I don't want to get into I'm for it, I'm against it. And so I said, there's a lot to be said about a use tax. So I'll tell you what, our project for the next group is, I want you to find out as much as you positively can about how this works, what the effects are, list the positive, list the negatives, list the unknowns. And so when we come back together, this next group, we're going to know this use tax. So if people ask us questions, we're going to know. We may not agree or we may agree, but we're going to know exactly how it works, because that's kind of what you do on a project at work. You don't pair off and say, I'm for it and I'm against it. You've got to get the whole picture. So that's an example.
That's great. That's great. You learn. Yeah. Learn about it. And do you find that, because you've always been involved in community projects your whole career and now too, would you say that this generation gets as involved, or is it after you talking about that a little bit that they see that maybe that's a good thing to do?
What I find is that they're not as up on local current events as I think we probably were at one time, because we used to read your newspaper. And that doesn't happen so much anymore. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's important to bring up current events that have to do with local issues, maybe regional issues, because what I find is they're involved, but they're involved in very different things. And so what the city council did is not necessarily on their radar, but it still affects them. And it's a way for people to say, current events are important besides helping and doing these things and trails and whatever you're into, to try to keep people saying your community is important and how it's operating. You need to be involved.
Right. Right. Well, and you talk about current events. There's so much to talk about going on in the country, in the world, so much going on. But I could see where you have to be careful. In fact, there was a Wall Street Journal cartoon the other day that said that you should stay away from politics and from religion and from the thickness of the pizza crust. These are just 3 things that you should stay away from. So.
Actually, the third one.
That's right. That's right. I love the thin and crispy, but that's a topic for another day, I think.
Well,
thank you so much for helping us understand this whole young professional network. And the more you talk about it, I wish there were groups of all ages doing this, because I think these conversations are so healthy, and maybe even a mixture of ages, because then you do start to see how people of different generations think. And I think that's important.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. And thank Storm Cloud Marketing, you and your great team of professionals created another podcast. Appreciate that. You can find Level Up video podcast on SoundCloud, Stitcher, iTunes, YouTube, and now Google Play. Visit impactbydan.com and you can see 29 podcasts. This is number 29 and more than 100 of my blogs too. Feel free to contact me at dan@danchiodo.net if you have a topic that you think would be a good one. And we end each show for a challenge for you. And so my challenge is, if you are a young professional, think about getting into a group that has good discussion that can help you in your career. And if you're not a young professional, if you're a seasoned professional, perhaps you should jump out there and see if perhaps your Chamber of Commerce has a program where you could get involved and help young professionals. Thanks for joining us for this podcast of Level Up. Cheers.